Before I give you anything to do on your own, we are going to create a final boilerplate together. So we have a previous boilerplate from the Indecision app, but we added so many new features. We added deployment, we added things like separate CSS files, we added testing, we added React Router, all of these great things that would be nice to be able to use in a new project. So in this one, we are just going to duplicate Expensify and gut it, bringing it down to something bare bones that we can use to build whatever app we might want to build. So to start this process, I'm going to head over to the Finder, and what I'd like to do is just duplicate the Expensify app directory. So I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to leave this in the React Course Projects folder, and for this one, we can call it something like boilerplate-v2. Now, depending on how many things you have in Node modules, it might take just a few seconds to actually duplicate. This should be done in just a moment, and there we go. So I'm going to rename this one boilerplate -v2. And now we're going to go ahead and crack this open. But before we do, let's just actually gut some stuff from the Finder, since I find it's easier to do multi-select in here. For some reason, Visual Studio Code still does not give you a good way to select a bunch of stuff from the tree view and delete it all. So what's going to change? At the root of the project, everything is going to stay the same. We're going to have this structure regardless of what we're building. So let's go folder by folder. Node modules is generated. No need to worry about that. We have public. In there, we do not have anything big we're going to gut. We can leave all of these in place. We can leave the index.html file in place. Next up would be server, also nothing to gut. It's really source where we're going to be deleting a bunch of stuff. And we're going to start off with actions. Now, I know that all the things we're about to delete do have references in the code. We'll fix that in just a little bit. For now, we're just going to start trashing things. So right here, I am going to delete the expenses and the filters actions, things that probably aren't going to exist in another application, although I will leave auth behind. In components, we're going to delete a bunch of stuff. Add expense, edit expense, expense form, expense list, list filters, list item, expenses summary. We're going to leave the others in place though. We're still going to have some sort of private dashboard page. We'll leave the header in place since we're most likely going to have one. And I will leave the landing page, the loading page, and the not found page in place as well. So I'm going to trash these expense related files, and we'll worry about fixing these ones in just a little bit. Next up, we have Firebase, not a whole lot in there. We're going to leave that in place. We have Playground. We can go ahead and trash that completely if we want to, or we can leave it around. Next up, we have reducers. Just like actions, I'm going to be deleting the filters and expenses file from the boilerplate. Next up is routers. Routers can stay exactly as it is. We have selectors next. Both of these selectors are going to be useless for another application where we're not managing expenses, so I will trash those. Then we have store, just one file, that is going to stay. Next up is styles. A lot of the stuff in styles could be reusable regardless of what you're building, so we're actually going to leave this directory completely untouched. Last up is tests, and since tests is basically a mirror to source, we're going to be deleting a lot of the same stuff. We have mocks first, we can leave that in place. We have actions second, I'm going to delete the non-auth test files. Then we have components, we're going to be deleting the exact same ones. So right here, add expense page, edit expense page, expense form, expense list filters, item, and summary. All of these are going to go away. Down below that, we have fixtures. For fixtures, we can delete both of those files. Neither of those are going to be required if we don't have expenses and we don't have expense filters. We have reducers next. Once again, we're just going to delete expenses and filters. Then we have selectors. Since the selectors are gone, these selector test files should go away too. So in terms of gutting the project, we've done a pretty good job. Deleting stuff is easy. What's going to be a little harder, and where we're going to spend most of the time in this video, is actually getting this back to a working place, because we just deleted a bunch of files that are still being referenced throughout the application. Now, the Boilerplate v2 is going to be available as your download for this lecture, so you don't have to go through the process with me of changing things, but I do recommend at least watching through the video so you know exactly what got changed to make the boilerplate work. I'm going to go ahead and move into the editor, and I'm going to crack open that new boilerplate. On the desktop, I have React Course Projects. I have Boilerplate v2 sitting right there. And I'm also going to navigate to this inside of the terminal. So I'll switch over to the terminal. In here, cd ... to get out of Expensify app / boilerplate -v2. And I can clear the output and do the same thing in my other tab, cd / boilerplate v2. Excellent. Now the goal is to actually get the app to a working state. I'm not even going to run it now because I know so many things are going to fail. Over inside of public, to start our changes, I am going to make a change to index.html. I'm just going to change Expensify over to something more generic like Boilerplate React app. Perfect. Then we can continue down the list. Server doesn't need to change anything at all. At the root, the only thing I am going to change is inside of package.json. I'm going to change the name from Expensify over to something like Boilerplate React app. Notice I am using hyphens there as opposed to spaces or capital letters, which are invalid in your package.json name. Now everything inside of here can stay the same. We can leave our dependencies in place. You could always remove ones that you know you're not going to end up using, but a lot of these are pretty common and we will continue to use regardless of what app we're building. So let's go ahead and start the process of working through the source directory where there are quite a few things that need to change. So inside of auth, we're good to go. Everything that is inside of here is going to stay inside of here. Inside of components, we can start from the bottom. Not found page looks great, doesn't use anything that we had removed. Login page is also the same. Now we do want to change the title right here from Expensify over to something like Boilerplate. And then we could just put a little message here, tagline for app. Now we can keep the button the same. Up above, we are importing the auth action, which is still something that exists. We did not delete that, so we can save our changes to login page and move on up the list. Loading page is next. Loading page is going to stay the same. Header is after that. Header can just have its title changed to Boilerplate. Everything else can stay exactly the same. There's nothing custom about it. We do import one thing that we have, but once again, that is just the auth actions. The last one is expense dashboard page. Now, I'm actually going to go ahead and rename this one. I'm going to rename it over to just dashboard page, something a little more generic. And I am going to go ahead and remove all of the components which no longer exist. And right here, I'll just put dashboard page content. Now I am going to also change the variables, expense dashboard page, and I'm going to now export the correct thing, and I will remove the 3 inputs from up above, all of which are files that no longer exist. So now we have a gutted version of dashboard page, and this is fine. It's something we can build off of. This is where we can start working on the private part of whatever application we try to build next. So we have components, actions. Next up would be Firebase. Firebase doesn't need any changes at all. Everything in here is pretty good and generic. What I am going to do though is remove all of the comments from when we played around with Firebase. So I can scroll to the bottom of the file, delete all of that stuff, and we end up with just the core configuration, which is exactly what we want. Next up in our list, we have reducers. We have the auth reducer, which imports nothing, so this can stay exactly as it is. We have routers after that. App router does import quite a few things, so let's see what we're working with here. We have the public route, private route, which is good, login page, not found page. Here we have the edit expense page and the add expense page. I'm going to be removing both of those since those components no longer exist. And we did change this one from expense dashboard page over to just dashboard page. So I'm going to change the file path and the variable name over to the generic version. Now down below, we're going to need to make a few changes to get that to work. I'm going to remove the private routes for create and edit. And right here, I just need to reference the new variable, dashboard page, as opposed to expense dashboard page. Perfect. Now the app router file is good to go. It is completely generic, and we can build off of this to create our application. We still have our login page, we have one private page, and we have our not found page. For private route, we do import the header and then we render it. We can keep all of this in place since the header component is something we do still have. Next up on the list would be public route. Public route doesn't seem to import anything at all, so we can leave this exactly as it is too. I'm going to go ahead and close all of the currently open files, and we're just going to keep working down the list, making things as generic as possible. Next up is selectors, an empty directory. We have store. inside of store, the only file in there, it does grab some stuff that no longer exists. Auth reducer still exists, but the filters reducer and the expenses reducer do not exist. So I'm going to remove the imports up above, and I'm also going to remove their usage down below. So now we just have a single reducer in combine reducers, and this is something that we would expand on as we built out our new application. After configure store, we have styles. Styles isn't going to change. Next up, we have tests. Tests is going to need to change. I'm going to start with actions. So we have our auth actions. Those don't need to change at all. Everything still looks good. In components, if you remember, the only thing we did change was the expense dashboard page. So all I need to do is just rename this file. And I'm also going to change the references in the file. So I have dashboard page here. And I'll just copy this and paste it in a few locations. I'm going to paste it for the input file path, for the test name, and for the component that we shallow render. Now we can save this and everything is going to work. We're going to get some failing test cases at first because we have some snapshot changes, but after that, everything should settle. So that is it for components. We can move down the list to fixtures. Fixtures is empty. That brings us to reducers. We just have our auth test, so there is no need to worry about anything in there. We have selectors next. Selectors is empty too. The last file I do want to touch is app.js. App.js loads in quite a few things. Now, many of them do still exist. We have our loading page, great. Firebase, great. We have our styles, all of that is good. Then we have get visible expenses. I am going to go ahead and remove that. And I'm also going to remove the import for start expenses up above. Start set expenses. Now, after that, we have a completely generic set of imports, nothing specific to the Expensify application. So all we need to do is make some changes down below. We just removed some things, so we have to remove the references to those things as well. Now, right here, we just set up the generic JSX. Then we have our renderer, all of which is non-Expensify specific. What we really do want to change is what's inside of here. So we have start set expenses, which no longer exists, but the stuff inside of it does still need to run. So all I can do is take the content inside of that callback. I can cut it out, adding it to the clipboard. I can remove the call to start set expenses along with the then callback, and I can paste the stuff that was inside of the callback right here after we dispatch login. Now we have a generic app.js file, and everything should work as expected. Let's shift over to the terminal and see if we got the job done. I'm going to use yarn test first, and I will pass down the watch flag. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we do expect a little bit of shifting here. Things have changed. For example, we changed the dashboard page component name. We also changed the title throughout the application. So here we have a new snapshot test. That's from the dashboard since we changed the name. We have a few failing snapshot tests, which is okay. And we have obsolete snapshots, which is also okay since we did remove quite a few components and their test cases. Up above, we have the changes to the names, which we expected. Up here, we also have the name changes. So everything is actually looking pretty good. Nothing too crazy. We can just hit U to accept all of those snapshot changes. That'll rerun the test suite, and we can see that we are back to something that's passing, which is great. So next up, we can actually run the application. I'm going to use yarn run dev server to get that done. We do still have our dev server script in place. This is going to go through the process of starting things up, and we can just head over to localhost 8080. I'm going to refresh localhost 8080. Right here, we are getting our header with boilerplate. We have boilerplate React app. We have dashboard page content. Everything is looking good. And if I do try to go to the root of the application, since I am logged in, I should get kicked out. Right here, I am back at the private page. Now I can open up the console just for kicks and make sure there are no errors. Everything looks good so far. If I go ahead and log out, I do get brought over to the login page where I could choose to log in again. So the whole point of doing this was to just give you a boilerplate project that you can clone to build whatever you want. So this boilerplate comes with the router, it comes with authentication, it comes with Redux, React, Webpack, all of these great features, so you don't have to go through the process of setting them up over and over again. This is going to give you an easy way to come up with an idea and prototype it in just hours as opposed to days. So now that we do have the boilerplate in place, what I do want to do is just create a separate repository for that, something that we can clone whenever we're ready to start a new project. I'm going to head over to github.com in a new browser tab. Now, we already have a repository for the Expensify app. I'm going to make a new one. I'll call this something like React course 2 boilerplate. Now, once again, I am going to make mine private before the launch, and I will make it public after the launch, so you'll actually be able to view it. And down below, we're just going to create the repository. There's no need for any description, and there's no need to initialize it with any files. And once again, remember, we're going to get brought to that instruction screen where it walks us through the various processes. And all we're going to do is grab the last 2 commands, and we'll run those in just a second. I am going to take this right here, the URL. And remember, this is the SSH URL. I'm going to copy it to the clipboard. And now we're going to go ahead and move through this process, but we're going to move through it on our own inside of the terminal. Now I'm going to shut things down and clear the output. The first thing I would like to do is completely wipe all of the old Git history. So the process of creating Expensify, all of those things, I don't want that to be part of this project. So what we're going to do is just build up our repository from scratch. I'm going to completely remove it using the following command. If you're on Windows, you need to run this one command from git bash. Just make sure you have navigated to the correct directory, your boilerplate v2 folder, because this command is destructive. It is going to destroy things without necessarily giving you the option to undo it. Once they're gone, they're gone. So right here, we are in the boilerplate v2 project. We're going to use rm space. Then we're going to add on the rf flag. So space hyphen rf. Then after another space .git. So this is going to recursively remove the .git directory sitting in boilerplate v2. And that is exactly what we want. If we go through this process and run git status, we're going to see that we no longer have a git repository. We just deleted it. Now we can create a brand new one with a fresh history for the boilerplate. I'll use git init to get that done. Now we have a new repository, and if I run git status, we can see all of those things showing up. So I can use git add dot to add all of those. Then we can use git commit with the m flag to add a message like init commit. Now that we have the initial commit, what we're going to do is add the remote and push it up. So we'll run the exact same commands listed over in GitHub. That would be git remote add origin followed by the URL we copied to the clipboard. I'm going to go ahead and run that command. Then it's git push with the U flag, and we're going to push to origin master. So once we do run this command, it'll actually take the boilerplate project, it will push it up, and if we head over to the browser, we should be able to refresh the screen and actually see our directory structure. So here we just have all of the boilerplate related stuff, and if we go over to the commit history, we see there is just one commit, the one we just made, as opposed to all of the commits that made up Expensify. Now that we have the boilerplate project in place and live on GitHub, we are all done. You can now use this in the future when you're building something new. You won't have to go through the process of setting up boring things like Webpack, Babel, or Jest from scratch ever again. That is it for this video. Let's continue on talking about the things you can build and the changes you can make.